As we approach the 50th anniversary of the National System of Interstate and Defense Highways, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today to discuss the development of that system in Texas, provide a broad assessment of some of the impacts that system has had on our state, and to look at the roles Texans played in this national endeavor. It was a Texan who would come to be called the father of the interstate highway system.
We required every state, as one of the elements of becoming eligible to receive federal assistance on the construction of the project, was the development of an integrated, interconnected system of highway pieces that were all joined together so that you could get from anywhere to everywhere, in effect. That's a massive concept, all right.
And this may be a good time to tell this story. As we will see, the interstate system has significant impacts on how the economy of Texas works, as well as on the lifestyle that is enjoyed by Texans. However, for many people, this system has pretty much always been there, and as a result may be taken for granted. An appreciation for the sacrifice, dedication, leadership, and commitment that were required to make all of this happen is not a part of the public consciousness. Perhaps it is important that we all have a better understanding of what we have, how significant it is, and how we got it. For the interstate system represents yet another major accomplishment of what Tom Brokaw would call the greatest generation. It began when we baby boomers were actually young.
Different day, different climate, different criteria for what was good and bad, and they just got the dirt flying and got on with it.
In anticipation of this 50th anniversary, TTI staff decided to take a first cut at looking at the interstate program in Texas. We have done this by poring through a lot of old literature and data, and we were surprised to find how little documentation exists on the subject. Looking at an issue as large as the interstate program can be approached in many different manners. We have by no means done all that could be done. We have also found that there are many inconsistencies, gaps, and discrepancies in the information available. As a result, we view what we are doing as a living document. We hope that those of you who have knowledge we have not yet uncovered or find inaccuracies in how we have interpreted information will bring that to our attention. With your help, by the end of the 2006 anniversary year, we can have more comprehensive documentation. In putting this material together, we had the chance to talk with many people, and they will help me tell this story today. So, let's take a look at a public works project that changed both Texas and the nation. As we do this, we will find that many people with ties to Texas had a huge influence on how the program evolved and developed.
My name is Frank Turner. I graduated from Texas A&M in 1929.
The federal story is richly and thoroughly addressed elsewhere, so I will just touch on it briefly to set the historical context. The Federal Aid Road Act in 1916 created the Federal Bureau of Public Roads, and this action would lead to a decades-long discussion of the need for a national highway system. Indeed, many lines drawn on maps in the 1920s would eventually become interstate highways. A 1939 statute called for the construction of a network of superhighways. In 1944, a committee recommended a system of so-called interregional highways. The Federal Aid Highway Act in that year designated a 40,000-mile system of such roadways. The individual who chaired this committee was Thomas McDonald. Chief McDonald served as head of the Bureau of Public Roads for 33 years. Upon leaving Washington, D.C. in 1952, he would come to the Agricultural and Mechanical College of Texas to help found a new upstart organization called the Texas Transportation Institute. Legislation at the federal level in 1947 formalized an interstate system of 37,800 miles. While 1956 is the anniversary date we will be celebrating soon, much of what is today the interstate highway system in Texas was included in both the 1944 and 1947 interstate maps. A basic map may have been in place, but many issues, such as how to pay for it and what should the federal-state relationship be, were not resolved. Two men with ties to Texas would lead in sorting through these issues. One was Frank Turner. Through his perseverance and leadership, difficult issues were resolved.
The trust fund is the key to the whole thing. It's, to those of us that were involved with it, it was the key to the whole program. And it was very sensible to do it that way. Nobody pays a nickel toward the federal program unless they put a nickel in the trust fund.
The other, born in Denison, Texas, was Dwight Eisenhower. Lieutenant Colonel Eisenhower had been part of a military convoy in 1919 that traveled from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. It took 62 days. They averaged 5 miles per hour. He also had seen and experienced the German Autobahns during and immediately after World War II.
Anyway, he came back from Europe after the war, ran for president, and made it with the notion that we should get on with a program in the United States similar to what he observed in Europe with the German Autobahn.
When this legislation passed Congress, Texans were in control, with Sam Rayburn being Speaker of the House and LBJ being Senate Majority Leader. President Eisenhower signed the interstate bill in his hospital room on June 29, 1956, without ceremony. The country was to build 41,000 miles of interstate, complete it by 1972, at a cost of about $35 billion. Eisenhower brought together a system approach, design concept, a federal commitment, and a financing mechanism, and, in this respect, truly was the man who changed America. On August 14, 1957, the American Association of State Highway Officials would select the interstate highway route marker after considering over 100 designs. Designs selected had been submitted by Texas Highway Department employee Dick Oliver. In 1990, Texan and President George Bush, whose father, Senator Prescott Bush, had been a supporter of the 1956 interstate bill, signed legislation officially renaming the system as the Dwight D. Eisenhower System of Interstate and Defense Highways. With this as background, let's focus our time today on what happened in Texas. As the 20th century began, there were few paved roads in the state. As the number of autos began growing, there was a corresponding increase in the desire for more roads. The Texas Good Roads Association was formed for the first time in 1903 with a slogan that resonated with Texans: "Get the farmer out of the mud." A series of proposals led to the creation of the Texas Highway Department in 1917, at which time there were all of 194,000 registered autos in Texas. Progress was slow in the early years. As the war in Europe began to galvanize our attention, Texas had 22,000 miles of state highway. The war effort largely stopped further new development and tore up much of the roadway in place. Legendary highway leader DeWitt Greer took over as state highway engineer in 1940. He would serve 27 years in that capacity and would become known as the king of the highway builders. Greer was a key supporter of the 1944 Federal Interregional Highway Plan. This advocacy would be memorialized in 1962 when Interstate 35 in Austin was completed and named the Interregional Highway.
DeWitt Greer was an Aggie. I have one special recollection of DeWitt Greer. I went to a luncheon where he was to be the speaker, and there had been others before him. And then they finally turned to Mr. Greer and asked him if he'd like to stand up and say a word. He stood up and said howdy and sat down and brought the whole crowd. He said one word, he put up one word, howdy, sat down. He was a marvelous engineer, but more than that, he was a person of great character and integrity. He wouldn't tolerate the slightest infraction that might reflect adversely on the State Highway Department in terms of integrity, how they would do it, how they would buy, what they would approve, relationships between the public and the contractor. but at the same time, he wanted things done and worked. He was an outstanding individual.
DeWitt Greer was probably one of the greatest politicians there ever was. He understood the workings of the legislature, and he was a man of vision.
We were seeing the beginnings of urban traffic problems during the war.
When I moved here, Houston was 263,000 people in 1941. Houston was a horrible place to get around. If you went from one side of town to another, you were looking at least 45 minutes to an hour.
In 1943, the department's responsibilities extended into the cities, and shortly after this, Greer established expressway or urban offices. Some of the expressways built by these offices would later become part of the interstate highway system. Today, it is almost impossible to imagine what the availability of cars must have meant to Americans following the war.
You have to understand the love affair that you know now exists between people and their automobile, but I can't describe to you how that was right after World War II.
The post-World War II boom brought massive highway development to Texas and also gave Texas a head start on interstate highway construction. Greer had saved highway money during the war to position the state well for this post-war construction. 1944 federal legislation provided some money, and Texas hit the ground running. By 1947, highway construction work in Texas accounted for 1/4 of all highway work under contract in the United States. The new highways were both popular and modern.
So completely different back then. People wanted highways, and they were favored building them, and they were willing to sacrifice to get transportation in.
Life magazine contained a picture of the cloverleaf at Northwest Highway and Central Expressway, and it was heralded as the state-of-the-art highway in the nation, and that was in the late 40s, early 50s.
When the 1956 interstate legislation passed, Texas had a lot of miles of roadway under construction that would be designated as interstates. Many of our interstate miles would simply be upgrades of other highways. For example, Interstate 45 would replace US 75, Interstate 35 would replace US 81, and Interstate 40 would replace the legendary Route 66. Mr. Greer served as president of the American Association of State Highway Officials in 1949. He would remain as the consummate insider throughout his career. Greer gave the Texas interstates a somewhat different design flavor, and in the early years emphasized rural interstate construction. This was faster to accomplish, cheaper, it developed a strong rural highway constituency, and it resulted in the formation of many smaller construction companies in the state. He did not win on all issues. He saw no need for full access control on roadways in sparsely developed areas, but federal requirements won out, and Greer quietly endured criticism for building overpasses for jackrabbits in sparsely populated West Texas. When Greer stepped down as state highway engineer in 1967, the interstate program in Texas was 60% completed and its direction established, but there was still about 1,400 miles to be built. For example, Interstate 10 between San Antonio and El Paso would not be completed until the 1990s. Interstate 44 was built in the 1980s. Greer's successor, J.C. Dingwall, continued Texas leadership in the national arena. The 1956 federal legislation had called for the entire interstate highway system to be completed by 1972. The federal system was ultimately declared complete in the early 1990s, although some construction continued. Like the rest of the country, Texas was not to meet the 1972 deadline. The first interstate section built under the new bill was let in 1956 for a segment of Interstate 45 near Corsicana. The last section, Interstate 27 between Lubbock and Amarillo, would be completed 36 years later. Out of a national interstate highway system that now includes almost 47,000 miles, Texas has more miles than any other state. As would be expected, a system of this magnitude with its costs and political implications has had many impacts on Texas.
Would be far less wealthy, far less quality of life had the interstate system not been built.
With the major sponsor being Lady Bird, in 1965 LBJ would propose highway beautification legislation. The proposal was controversial since beautification was viewed as a diversion of trust fund money. LBJ would ultimately sign the bill October 22, 1965. He would give the first pen as well as a kiss on the cheek to Lady Bird. In a ceremony 23 years later at the White House honoring Lady Bird for her contributions to highway beautification, Texan and then Speaker of the House Jim Wright looked back at the day this bill passed in the House. It turns out that LBJ had a party planned for congressional leaders and their spouses that evening. However, LBJ had made his wishes clear. As the House debated the bill past 10:30 p.m., the spouses, dressed for the White House party, waited. The House would pass the bill that evening. And we in Texas have especially come to enjoy the beauty along our roadsides. The interstates provided mobility that allowed Texas to grow. Economic competitiveness and quality of life tie closely to the interstate highway development.
The highways are the foundation of our economy, of our society, of what we are. Through highways, we've opened every quadrant of our country to exploration and to development. They've been indispensable.
The biggest impact it's had is the connectivity that it's provided across the state, as far as, the ability of businesses in Texas to do commerce and to, transport goods and services.
It really is just an outstanding worldwide engineering feat. You stop and think about it. To think that you have the whole United States connected by the interstate system, where, just as I mentioned before, you can get in a car and go completely across the country without having a single signal line.
This opportunity to travel across the country without having to stop had great appeal.
Even with modest expansion of those 2- and 4-lane roads, you would continue to have the opportunity to stop at every little town.
In the early interstate years, there appeared to be no shortage of roadway capacity on the interstates. It almost looked like we were designing for lanes per vehicle rather than vehicles per lane. However, that would change. Today, actual volumes per lane, more than twice those originally planned for, are common. Typical volumes in 2003 at these Houston locations are 70 times greater than they were in 1936 and 10 to 30 times larger than they were in 1960.
We've designed 635 out north of, well, it goes all the way around, but the north section was the first that was built from 35 over to US 75. We built 10 lanes. People thought we was crazy. We was building too much. Our estimated traffic was about 80,000. The time we opened it, it was that high. Now it's over 300,000. It ought to have been, instead of 10 lanes, 20, I guess, but you couldn't very well get 20 in there.
With the traffic that they had at that time, I don't think even the most far-looking could see how much traffic was going to be on the interstate system.
I don't think that we had any idea that we'd see the growth in Texas and the growth in truck traffic that we're seeing now. I don't think the designers 5 years ago have any idea what's going to happen in the future.
Given the travel demand that currently exists, without the interstates, the estimated cost of congestion in Texas would double. Perhaps one other analogy helps describe the enormous mobility impacts associated with the interstate system. We often say, and quite properly so, that Southwest Airlines has changed the way Texas does business. However, approximately 40 times more passenger miles are moved on the Texas interstates than on intrastate Southwest Airlines flights. One of the huge benefits of this system of highways is improved safety. The basic design was safer, and we also started aggressively looking for ways to make the roadways safer. Much of this work was done in Texas. For example, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Texas Highway Department and TTI worked together to develop safety devices such as crash cushions, breakaway signs, and breakaway light poles.
The people at TTI get a big plus for everything they've done in safety. They are outstanding in the work they've done in safety. The good thing about it is they work with the department that whatever they come up with, the department has utilized it. It hadn't just been a study that's put in a shelf. It's been something that's been put into use. Of course, I'm prejudiced. I think it's the best there is in the United States, all put together.
We estimate that for each mile of interstate highway constructed in Texas, 6 lives have been saved and more than 300 injuries avoided. The safer interstate highways in Texas have reduced the economic losses due to vehicle crashes by over $45 billion. In the decade following 1956, Texas and the nation launched on a massive highway building program. We were building wide highways to high design standards, and construction cost was a major consideration. It is not surprising that problems were encountered, particularly as these roadways traversed the cities. Parkland and neighborhoods were disrupted or disappeared. An anti-freeway movement developed that brought together neighborhood preservationists, environmentalists, and minorities. Texas was not immune to these concerns, and the newspapers of the day featured many of the experiences in the state. For example, a 1970 Houston Chronicle article described the last gasp of a 4-mile stretch of land being cleared for the South Freeway. Similarly, in 1973, the expansion of the Gulf Freeway in Houston became an issue in the 3rd Ward. The development and construction of the McAllister Freeway in San Antonio represents one of the landmark environmental highway battles in this country. These kind of debates were going on in cities across the nation. They would lead to significant changes in procedures and laws. The transportation system has always been key in allowing and encouraging economic development, and this is where the impacts of the interstates is perhaps greatest. Farm-to-market roads got the farmer out of the mud. Today, our highway system, with the interstates as its backbone, supports an economic system based on just-in-time delivery, and NAFTA trade flows on large truck volumes over Texas highways. It is the lower transportation costs in the United States that often offset the higher production costs. Property next to the interstates that had sold on a price per acre began selling on a price per square foot as the highway projects were built.
We couldn't compete in the world economy. More and more we're competing in the world economy. More and more of these urban areas are our base. And we have a potential great asset if we nurture it, which is our transportation system.
Probably would have never had a Dell, probably in San Antonio, probably never would have had a Toyota.
Well, transportation in the state of Texas has been very important to our growth and development over the past several decades. At one point in time, we had major manufacturing operations in over 16 cities scattered throughout the state of Texas. And it's fair to say that if we didn't have a strong, capable interstate highway system in the state, that our business wouldn't have developed, that we wouldn't have been able to sustain that level of operations in the state, and that we probably wouldn't be the company we are today without that basic infrastructure investment.
We're a company that differentiates ourselves between the quality and the freshness of products that we serve our customers. And a good highway system is critical to us getting that product to our stores in a timely manner.
Toyota. Why is Toyota coming to San Antonio? It's because there's an interstate highway north and south, east and west, and they can service a tremendous area from that factory. And if we didn't have the interstate program coming out of San Antonio, you wouldn't see Toyota locating their factory there.
Its impact was in creating economic centers to allow the movement of freight, the movement of people, the movement of resources in and out of areas that were tied together through the interstate system.
Without this interstate highway system, the economy and job market in Texas would be much different. We estimate Texas would have 1.6 million fewer non-farm jobs, which would support a population of 4.2 million fewer people. A different set of problems faced those towns and cities that were not well served by the interstates.
Without it having an interstate coming through Bryan College Station with a major university that we have here, it has really stopped some of our economic growth.
Bryan College Station is not the only area that feel like they've sort of been left off the interstate system. We heard a lot of noise out of the valley.
It could also mean that when the main highway ceased to be the main street, rural Main Street might decline or disappear. One example is McLean, a small town in the Texas Panhandle. By 1909, it was a center for agriculture and railroad business. During the golden age of Route 66, it had 59 businesses and a population of over 1,500. Route 66 was Main Street. When the city leaders saw that plans for Interstate 40 meant that the main highway would no longer be the main street, they fought the project unsuccessfully. The routing of Interstate 40 had at least some of the impact the city leaders had feared, and today's population is less than 850. The Interstate program also gave a purpose to a federal role in investment in highways. Clarity of federal purpose provided by the Interstate Highway Program is, perhaps, illustrated by the increases in congressional earmarking that have occurred since the Interstate program began winding toward completion. Earmarking of highway bills prior to 1980 simply was not an issue, but that began to change noticeably with the 1987 bill.
I hate to say this, but it's true. Engineering and economic principles are not the driving force of our transportation policies today. What drives transportation today is politics. If you guys don't stop this, you're soon going to have one project for every member of Congress.
President Reagan chose to veto the 1987 bill, saying that he disapproved of establishing Congress as the nation's chief highway engineer. Of course, Congress would override the veto, and the number of earmarks continues to increase. The interstate system and the federal-state partnership that built it changed the face of Texas and America. We are now beginning to enter into an interesting discussion over what will be the role of these highways for the next 50 years. While we reap and enjoy the benefits, we struggle with congestion, funding concerns, air quality, and other issues. As we look forward, it appears that the interstate program in Texas is by no means over. Many are advocating a new interstate highway, I-69, which, if built, will largely replace US 59 and add over 1,000 miles of interstate highway to Texas. As the planning proceeds, so do the pro and con debates that have been so sharply defined over the past many decades. In preparing this material, we've had a chance to look at the past and speculate as to the future. A number of intriguing observations were made by those with whom we visited. We've been reminded that time passes quickly. 50 years ago, it was not possible to foresee how Texas would look today. We will no doubt predict with similar accuracy how it will look 50 years from now. It will not be all that long before others are in meetings such as this, talking about the 75th or the 100th anniversary of the interstate program.
It's hard to believe that West 610, the West Loop in Houston, you know, that was the edge of town at the time that was conceived. I mean, there were gravel road. Westheimer was a gravel road. 50 years goes by in a very short period of time. It seems forever when you're a 12-year-old, but at our age, it wasn't that long ago.
We've heard time and time again how Texans have always been proud of our highways and how we had the team in Texas that was able to effectively take the interstate program from a concept to a reality. In this state, the Texas Highway Department is a huge positive part of the interstate story.
We did have a marvelous state highway department, one that, as I said, was the envy of many other states. Great quality, a lot of good Aggies in it.
A good highway department, good leadership, good career, outstanding leadership. People, remarkable agency, people of high integrity. They didn't smoke or drink much. And they stayed married to the same people, and all went to A&M.
We took a lot of pride in the department. The fact that the department Through the years, it's been probably one of the most respected state agencies.
I think Texas did it best. And why? I'd have to give the commission and Mr. Greer responsibility for really starting it off.
Many noted that as the economy and population of this state keep growing, there will continue to be a demand for more highways, whether called Interstate 69, Trans-Texas corridors, or something else.
We'll never finish the interstate. America is growing, and the interstate is a part of that growth, and they're partners.
We think we're at sort of at the tail end of the interstate construction, interstate highway system, which may be as far as that system goes. But I think as far as increasing highway expenditures and construction to take care of the wants and desires of the public, we're still at the beginning.
Those we spoke with noted that Texas has been fortunate to have had many leaders with the vision and foresight to recognize that transportation is important to this state.
We go back and we think about the people that envisioned it. You know, they did have a great vision to think ahead for the future. Transportation needs will not go away. Transportation is something that all of us need every day. We all use it in one form or fashion.
The interstate roads have had massive impacts. They have been romanticized and they have been criticized. They have become part of our poetry, our song, and our literature. Texas and the nation are very different today because this system of superhighways was conceived and brought to fruition. It is a public works endeavor worthy of accolades, and we should take great pride in celebrating the 50th anniversary of the creation of this program. We owe much to all of those who made it happen.